Hi, I'm Liam Dann, New Zealand Herald Business Editor at Large, and welcome to this episode of Money Talks. This is a podcast about money, but we're not going to tell you how to get rich, and we're not going to try and pick the next interest rate move. In this series, I'll be talking to interesting New Zealanders about how money has shaped their lives and what they've learned over the years. For today's podcast, I'm joined by leader of the ACT Party, the MP for Epsom, and the Associate Finance Minister, David Seymour. Kia ora, David. Welcome to Money Talks.
G'day, and thanks for having me.
Hey, look, so one thing I want to clarify here is that when we have politicians on Money Talks, we're not going to get deep into fiscal policy or anything, so you're safe in that regard. I know you probably wouldn't mind. If you have got any big announcements, feel free to make them, but really this is about going back and getting into your relationship with money and all that sort of stuff. So, if I can jump back, what would be your first memories of having your own money? Do you recall having it in your hand or your pocket as a young child?
I have a very strange memory of having a $2 note, and I must have been, 4, 5, 6, and I lost the thing, and I was just so devastated.
Yeah.
Couldn't believe it.
It was probably big money back then.
Well, and look at start talking about some of the management of inflation since. But no, it was, and so I just remember that real panic at having lost the $2 note. It was a purple thing with a big picture of the Queen on it.
Yeah, in fact, they didn't last much. I mean, I'm guessing that you're born in the 80s, so it was late 80s maybe?
83. So
it wasn't long before the coins came in.
That's another thing I remember really clearly, because 1990 was an exciting time. We had the Expo, and it was the sesquicentenary of the treaty,
Commonwealth Games,
and the new money and the plastic money, which you could put through the wash.
Yeah. So where were you growing up at that point?
So I was in Whangarei. So my dad's family's from the Manawatu. He grew up in Fielding. My mum was born in Te Kaupuru, where a hugely disproportionate number of New Zealanders have been born, and her family moved over to Whangarei, so we settled there in the 80s.
Sure, and would you describe it as a fairly middle-class family? I note, I think in the bio that you went to a Decile 1 intermediate, was it sort of a...
Yeah, I mean, it was a whole mix of things, and you get that in a small provincial city.
Yeah.
So, it's not like the country where you're sort of isolated in a very small community or a really big city which is sort of sorted into lots of different communities, rich and poor and so on. It's a provincial city where, everyone's beside everybody. So I went to in a suburb which had, it was pretty idyllic. It was a new subdivision. Everyone could ride their bikes in a cul-de-sac, and also was on the fringe of the city, so you'd also go in the bush and build huts. Went to a primary school that still had an ag day because it had traditionally been out in the country, and then went to intermediate across town that was just a totally different kettle of fish. So in many ways that was sort of a real introduction to the world, because you realise that not everything was like this sort of city fringe, sort of a suburb, sort of a country type.
Suburban paradise kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, did you have pocket money growing up?
Yeah, I used to get $2 a week for this was, and they were coins, so this must have been after I lost the note. Yeah, but I used to get $2 a week for opening or emptying the dishwasher. And also used to get $2 for mowing my grandparents' pretty big backyard. So that was, I hate to think about what the labour inspectors would say about that.
Yeah. Were the things that you were spending it on, saving for, or were you a saver, or just go straight to the dairy?
Well, it was sort of sporadic, and it sort of repeated throughout my life that you'd be really disciplined for a while, and maybe get up to $30 or $40, and you think you're rich, but then you sort of want to buy a model car or toy or something, and then you sort of blew it all. So no, I suspect probably 50-cent mix from the dairy.
Yeah. I mean, it's a universal theme almost amongst anyone I've spoken to on this is running down to the dairy in New Zealand. Yeah. So from there, were there part-time jobs? Did you deliver papers or any of that sort of stuff?
No, I wanted a paper run, but the thing that thwarted me for most of my time was I went to boarding school in Auckland, so I tried to get a job at McDonald's and various places, but they'd always say, well, you're going to bugger off in 2 weeks, so why would we train you?
Right, yeah.
Because I didn't really appreciate it at that time, but for a business, you actually end up sort of sinking a lot into a person until they're actually useful to you. And if they're going to be gone in a few weeks, that's not going to work out. So pretty limited. My first job was at TDC Sawmills, Tony Davies Colley. I actually saw Tony up in Whangarei yesterday.
So this was a summer job, was it?
Yep, this was after I finished high school, finished sixth form, went off to uni, and it was tough. We were doing 60 hours a week. And I remember, for some reason, me and my mate from school, we started at 7 for the first month we were starting out, but actually the sawmill opened at 6. And when we transferred to starting, we discovered that everyone else was being given a fresh pair of gloves every morning.
Wow.
Which was just an unbelievable relief.
Yeah. So you went off to boarding school at Auckland Grammar, is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, was that because there wasn't the opportunity there in the high school, or was there a driver for you to get there? Did you have a passion for sort of getting out of Whangarei?
Yeah, I mean, it was mostly my parents at that time. Some of their friends were sending their kids out of Whangarei, and I know at that time there was a bit of debate about, what's the merits of the schools here versus there. But I certainly found it life-changing that, a couple of things happened. One is I met Sir Edmund Hillary in my first couple of months. And one of the reasons I think we need a 4-lane road up north is that when you grow up in a place like that, you can feel like the world's a long way away.
Yeah.
I remember a story, someone that made the Northland reps that I knew, under 14s or under 12s. I did not make the Northland reps or any other representative sports team, I can assure you.
Did you play sports?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just not very well. My main position was left, right, out.
Yeah.
There's a kid from up north came down to play Auckland, sat in a motel in St Mary's Bay, and he sat up the whole night just staring at the harbour bridge because he couldn't believe it. He'd seen nothing like it. He hadn't seen an escalator or an elevator before. So certainly coming to the big smoke and meeting famous people, it certainly changed how you looked at what was possible. Yeah,
I mean, at school, what were your passions? What were the subjects that you kind of fell naturally into?
Rugby.
Yeah.
I loved playing rugby. I wish I could do it again, but it's a bit like some of your columns. I'm at the stage where you feel a bit creaky. You're not sure that you're much more likely to get injured and less likely to recover. So despite having limited talents, I loved playing rugby.
Where'd you play?
Mostly open side flanker.
Oh, yeah. So
it was
like
weight,
in the thick
grade.
of it. Yeah.
Well,
so
and I was a lock, yeah. So I was actually, people can't believe I was a lock, but I am actually tall for my weight.
Yeah. Well, I was a hooker, which is also people can't believe it,
yeah.
in a team that was not very good, but which I actually worked out. I probably could have played Chris Luxon's team. Like he was third level.
Okay, were there any bald people on the other team?
I think he had a pretty good head of hair then. I don't know, but apart from the rugby, was it? I mean, you went into engineering and philosophy, right? At university. Those are, I guess, one's right in the thick of the arts, and one is very practical. Was that because you enjoyed both sides of that sort of academic world?
Yeah, I just wanted a bit of insurance. I mean, I wanted to do engineering, partly because my family has been in that business for several generations, and I think coming out of a good form class at a school like Grammar, there's a lot of I was useless at English, so I wanted to do law. And I didn't quite think I'd make med school. And I was useless at drawing, so that was architecture gone. So that really left engineering. And so you had a bit of pressure to do something like that, plus the family connection to it. But I just felt like I wanted an outlet or something else. I wanted to hedge my bets, not put all the eggs in the same basket, etc. And philosophy sort of seemed like the way to go. I actually started off doing a couple of education papers because I wanted to be a teacher, and I was quickly persuaded that the kind of highly ideological education that's given as part of initial teacher education is not preparing people for the classroom, and that's something, funnily enough, 20 years later the government's
still battling.
Well, the government's moving on that now. But
you're up against, I mean, we won't get into much policy, but you're up against that ideological force in the teacher unions. And
I think there's been a strong belief for a long time that if you got the cap and gown photo, you'd made it. And so successive governments have made it much easier to get the cap and gown photo. They've kept the fees at the uni, they've ramped up the subsidies, they've taken the interest off the loans while you're studying, then forever. And as a result, lots more people get their picture with the cap and gown, but I'm not sure that the level of skill and usefulness is there. And I suspect that actually, if you look at how they do it in places like Germany, that there's a place for more learning on the job.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Philosophy, though, do you have a favourite philosopher or favourite school?
Oh, yeah, look, I'm a big Popperian. I think what Popper did in the philosophy of knowledge was really, really powerful. And the short summary is that you have your skeptics who believe it's impossible to know anything with certainty, your dogmatists who believe that you can know things with certainty, and neither of them are particularly satisfying. Popper's, I guess, a view of critical rationalism or falsification that, well, look, you probably never get to absolute truth, but you can have a hypothesis that you are prepared to abandon if the facts change your mind.
Yeah. That
to me seemed to be the most sort of civilised way to think about the world, and it is the basis of science, or has been the basis of scientific progress for a long time. I think it's under enormous attack. I saw the latest Green MP has a CV where he has done research, quote unquote, attacking Western empiricism. And I don't think that observing the world you see and testing that against a hypothesis is a Western thing.
Or a cultural thing, yeah.
No, it's a method that's available to all people and appears to advance knowledge and solve problems and extend people's lives with better medicine and so on, much better than anything else that any humans have tried. But my point is that, when you've got people taking serious papers doing research that is based on attacking the whole method of hypothesizing and observing, jeepers, that whole methodology that's done so well for us with science and reason for a couple of centuries now is really under attack.
I guess it goes to the engineering a bit too, because hard work building a bridge if you're not going to...
Yeah, and look, this postmodern view is that, we all have lived experience and we all have our view of the world, and they're equally valid. And if you criticise someone's worldview, then, you're actually, attacking them. Well, that doesn't cut it in engineering. I mean, if you're an electrical engineer, you get it wrong, people get electrocuted, or your signal just doesn't arrive or isn't properly decoded. So the way that postmodernism has made all academia sort of relativist and based on the perspective of the person, I think is nuts, and it's doing huge harm because it makes it very difficult for us to talk to each other.
It sounds like you're kind of quite sceptical of ideology. You probably get accused of being ideological by the left because they see you as being on the right or neoliberal or whatever. I mean, how do you feel about the idea of ideology, the idea that your view is neoliberal? If you take it to economics, you got your Keynes and your Friedman, and where do you sit on those sort of schools of ideological thought?
Well, I mean, you've got to remember that Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz, they won the Nobel Prize for examining the history of monetary policy in the US. And they demonstrated that their hypothesis that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon fits the data, that it actually existed in reality better than what Keynes had put forward. Keynes himself said, when the facts change, I change my mind. Keynes himself had come up with a theory that fit the data better than anyone else up to that point. So, since then we've had modern monetary theory, and now you don't hear very much about that after the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I do, unfortunately, but
sorry
letters to me.
Sorry to hear it, but the point is, on any issue, you can actually take that basic Popperian method that there is a real world, that we can all join hands and problem solve through it, that there's a universal humanity and we all have the same chances and choices to work through the world. that works. Once you get into this postmodernism, I have lived experience, I'm writing from an XYZ perspective, and, if you attack my view, then you're wrong. And that is nuts. And the worst example of it is, there's actually people in universities around the world who will seriously argue that the Western scientific tradition is, I guess, angled against people who are obese. And when you say, well, actually, medicine has made discoveries that, being overweight can correlate with a number of heart conditions and other health problems, they say, oh, well, that's just an oppressive regime of thought that doesn't apply to me. That's what this relativism means at its most absurd but real example.
Let me bring it back to where you were coming through and how you got into the political side of it. I mean, I see where you're coming from, but, at the time you were coming through, it hadn't sort of switched around so much. There was a sense, when I was coming through anyway, that there was a sort of an absolutist conservative view that dominated the world. And this was, in those days, the postmodernism, woke, whatever you want to call it, they were the underdogs. They're coming through. It's sort of flipped around. And why I'm interested is because often young people and students in particular tend to be more on that rebellious, coming from the left side of it. And it seems like you were attracted quite early to a more conservative outlook. I mean, is that fair?
No, I mean, there might be a bigger age gap between us than is obvious from your appearance. But certainly the years I was at the University of Auckland from 01 to 06, there was a real, what I regarded as a heavy bias towards the postmodernist way of thinking. Yeah. You certainly didn't get, perhaps outside the economics department where I tutored for a semester, you didn't get people coming out defending what I would regard as the sort of neoliberal view of the world. Sure. We were, as ACT on campus, I was a member of then, we were countercultural.
Right, yeah. Probably I'm about 10 years older than you. But you could see that coming. But certainly, say, if you think of countercultural in the 60s and 70s, it was pushing back against what it saw as, the industrial military complex, all this sort of conservatism of the 50s. But you felt coming through that already there was a sense of, where the action was in politics was more to the right, or how do you describe it? Because I get, are you a conservative, neoliberal, right wing? People use all these labels. Do you have a...
Yeah, they do. But no, I mean, I think that philosophical view of, being prepared to hypothesize and test against the evidence is important. I've changed my mind about things over the years, but I think it's also important not to pigeonhole people, because sometimes a person can be, on the same side as you on one issue, but against you on others. So, for example, I'm known for having legalised euthanasia. Now that is a socially liberal cause. It's about individual choice. It's opposed by a lot of the religious establishment quite vehemently. I was one of 20 MPs that voted for abortion to be decriminalised, but actually go even further, to be between a woman and her doctor, at any time, not to have this kind of halfway house that actually eventuated, but which is still better than what we had. But I'm a liberal on that, on free speech. I'm almost an absolutist. I think you should have the right to say what you like. You certainly shouldn't be, corralled by some sort of, censor or a human rights commissioner or someone that can haul you and say you offended someone, you're in big trouble, and lock you up. I'm opposed to that. But equally, I look at the fact that I, as a minister now, am responsible as a 50% shareholder in 28 different state-owned enterprises, Crown Research Institutes, Schedule 4 companies, and so on. And I think this is nuts. I don't believe it's possible for a politician to have that level of oversight as a shareholder on behalf of 5 million people. And there's very good evidence that private and privatised firms do better. The SOEs that we have made a very poor return on equity, and I don't think we should own those. Now, the current government policy, I hasten to add, is that we will continue to own them, but within the government I continue to agitate we shouldn't. And the facts are that, what do you say to someone who believes in privatisation, a woman's right to choose, euthanasia and free speech?
Yeah, liberal is a complicated word these days, right?
Well, I'm a liberal in the classical and consistent sense of it, that I believe you should be able to do what you like as long as you're not harming anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of live my life along those lines, but then I'm sort of conscious that as a relatively lazy person or whatever, I sometimes...
That's self-aware.
Yeah, but the government involvement is the government making me put into KiwiSaver, making me do some things that actually are good for me. I guess what I'm getting at, I had a good chat to Sir Roger Douglas here, and he takes it to an extreme that probably isn't politically viable now around what you do with welfare payment and health system and things like that. But what do you do with the people who aren't, and I'll use myself, but who aren't up to making those choices and decisions? That's where the government comes in, right?
Well, again, go back to the data. So the guy I find most interesting on KiwiSaver is David Laws, who says, look, yes, people can point to a big wad of cash in their KiwiSaver account. What they can't point to is that maybe they've kept their credit card running longer than they would have otherwise. Maybe they've paid off their mortgage slower than they would have otherwise. Maybe they've, neglected or they've pulled back from investing in other things that they might have otherwise. So at the end of the day, once you take out the taxpayer contribution to your KiwiSaver, it hasn't actually increased your saving at all. So it's true, you don't have to be ideological.
Yeah.
You can look at what's been the outcome of this particular policy.
There's always an opportunity cost, but I would say, well, even myself, it's like I'm glad it's there because I probably wouldn't have invested it wisely. I probably would have spent it on records.
Well, but what I'm telling you is you've got someone who has devoted a lot of their time and has considerable expertise in the subject, and they've studied it and they've recorded their observations. This is a scientific method, right? Yeah. And they've said that actually, when it's all said and done, the things you're conscious of, the things you're not conscious of, your net saving level is no different. Yeah.
So you wouldn't support compulsory super? No one does in any party, to be fair. But when you look at Australia, $4.8 trillion there, they're a wealthy country, and their financial markets, they're humming.
So let's just unpack that. First of all, on the compulsion. So I've had a few people lately, given the high interest rates and the tough situation we face, they're saying, look, I'm getting hammered up the wazoo on my mortgage interest. Far more mortgage interest than my KiwiSaver's returning. Why can't I'm actually losing money because I can't take the principal out of my KiwiSaver and reduce my mortgage. That's the kind of thing that people are forced to do in a system of compulsion, and I think that's wrong. Then you look at Australia. It's absolutely true that Australia has these super funds, but you're not asking what's the counterfactual. If they hadn't had compulsion, would Australian savings rates be any different? Well, evidence is actually around the world. If you talk to, I'm going to forget his name, Michael Littlewood at the University of Auckland, it actually doesn't make a huge difference how much compulsion there is. Savings rates are influenced by other factors. So again, everyone points to Australia, but you've got to ask yourself, what's the counterfactual? If they didn't have that compulsion, I suspect they would have saved just as much.
Okay. I want to jump back to career a little bit. You come out of university, you briefly an engineering job?
Yep. It was a pretty rough time. So I got a job, a 3-month contract, and in my second month, the project I was working on was cancelled. It was actually Ericsson doing fibre optic cables being blown with compressed air through Vector's channels. So this was fibre to the home before there was fibre. It was very cool stuff. And,
They're just too ahead of the curve.
They were playing regulatory chicken with the it was a very messy thing. Anyway, needless to say, one of the first people to go was their 21-year-old they'd just hired, as we'll see you later. So that was the end of that contract. But at that time, my mum had become very ill, so I returned to Whangarei and started working for what was then my grandfather's company, while we mum sort of convalesced there. She passed. Now I thought, what the hell do I do? I got offered a job in Canada, so I left.
And you're in Canada, basically a shorthand, and I don't know if it's completely fair, but you're kind of working for think tanks that may be along the lines of the New Zealand Initiative, that kind of...
Yep, it'd be very similar to the initiative. And it was a wonderful thing, because first of all, growing up in Whangarei, spent some time in Auckland, suddenly you're in a place that actually has flights to Chicago, a place that you just couldn't even think of going to.
But that was through that wasn't through engineering. That was through maybe the political stuff you were doing around the sides and having a philosophy degree and knowing that you could.
Well, it was actually through Roger Douglas because Canada went broke in the early 90s, and they formed these taxpayers' federations. And then they got Roger Douglas to come and tell them what he thought they should do, because New Zealand had been through a similar problem that Canada was then in. And so Roger maintained a connection with these Canadian think tanks, and so he was my connection to them. 20 years, almost 20 years later. Yeah. So that's how that happened, and I effectively did like a postgraduate degree. I mean, I learned how to do a media interview, or try. Read a lot more philosophers and economists. Wrote newspaper op-eds and policy papers, such as they were for the think tank. So it was, if you were going to do what I eventually ended up doing, it was like a sort of a perfect sort of, it was like a learn while you study, free, in fact they paid me, postgrad degree. Yeah.
And getting into all that political action, I guess, in a Canadian way. How was that?
Well, the thing about think tanks is that they're quite proud of not dirtying themselves with politics. Yeah. It's always a debate of should you get involved in actual politics. So it was policy rather than politics. And I think a lot of people in politics today, it's surprising how little they know about policy and how unimportant it is to them.
Yeah. And look, I don't want to harp on about the fact, but we because we had Sir Roger here, and he made some comments, and he'd made them before the election last year in a couple of places, which were kind of dismissive of all the parties, and part of that, I guess, was a sense that he feels that ACT now has gone too centrist or mainstream. I just wondered what you thought of those comments. Are you still pushing for those, very much those, I guess he is pushing a very the flat tax and all that stuff that maybe you just think that you couldn't sell, or?
Well, it's interesting. I was reading a political autobiography of a guy called Peter McArdle, who's one of those fascinating guys. He was in at least 3 different parties. He was a minister. He actually went from being a minister to a political staffer, which most people are far too proud to do. So I read with interest, and McArdle said, Roger Douglas, without a doubt, is the most significant New Zealand politician in the post-war era, and I agree with that. But a couple of things about Rog. One is he's always in a state of rebellion. So he has bagged every political leader he's been a member of since Norman Kirk. So I would be disappointed if he hadn't bagged me as the current ACT leader. He's bagged Rodney, he bagged Richard and everyone. He bagged Longy, as famously fell out 40 years ago now. And he also has been so significant historically because he's just absolutely uncompromising. He knows what he believes needs to be done, and he just goes and does it. And so, very proud to be associated with him, proud to be attacked by him, and totally understand why he says what he says. Yeah, all right.
Coming back through early on, you got. You come back to New Zealand. What was the driver for coming back? I mean, you could have presumably had a career in Canada.
Yeah, well, I did, and by that time I'd moved to Calgary. I was working with Preston Manning, who people describe as the best Prime Minister Canada never had. He had started a party with one person, kind of familiar, and got it up to be the official opposition. So it's a bit of an inspiration in what Preston was able to do with the Reform Party there. And he was just a great mentors, and he was running a think tank there, so I loved working for Presto. But then I came back for my brother's and one of my friend's weddings, 2 separate weddings, and basically at that point John Banks had resigned. ACT was really, for all intents and purposes, over, and I thought, well, if I spend the year knocking on doors basically apologising for everything that's happened and ask them to give you another chance, they might do it. So I did that. I knocked on about 14,000 doors in the Epsom electorate, and it was a useful experience for a bunch of reasons. But mainly people said, yeah, okay, but don't let us down. And that's been that a lot of those conversations still stick with me. So being the MP for Epsom has always been my first job, but also a style of politics that's old-fashioned. It's like what you learn about in fourth form social studies, that basically people choose their representative to go and speak, and they're responsible to those people. That's sort of that was quite formative for me.
Sure. I mean, you're really associated with Epsom. It has a reputation for being, the seat that's been part of a deal and all that sort of stuff. But when you came back, did you targeted Epsom because you felt a connection? Did you live there, or is it?
Yeah, well, I'd lived there for, outside.
Auckland.
Yeah, apart from when I lived in Canada and Whangarei.
Yeah.
When I lived in Auckland, I almost always lived in the Epsom electorate. I think I had a year down at the uni hostel, but other than that, I'd been an Epsomite, yeah.
And I think you had a reputation for being a party leader who didn't own their own house.
Yep.
Own your own house now?
I do now, but it took me till I was 37 because I'd basically spent my life up till then on passion projects and travelling. So, working for a think tank, like I said, it was a sort of a postgrad degree and it was free, and in fact they paid me, but not much. I'd spent 2 years of my life in 2011 and 2014 basically taking the year off to campaign. So that didn't help with the finances. And so, it took me a few years in Parliament before I got to at the stage where, like many people of my generation, if you have a partner, it's doable. If you don't have a partner, it's nearly impossible. And also, just to add, if you're someone who's a bit older who doesn't own their house, life's very hard.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important things we can do as a government is get back to the stage where a generation can realistically build and own its own home, and have families at a younger age and get on with life. Whereas at the moment, I think our dysfunctional housing market has actually buggered up many, many aspects of life in New Zealand.
Yeah, it is interesting. I'm too much into policy, but the stuff that Chris Bishop's been talking about and coming from the policy stuff in the last few weeks or months, it seems like this government is prepared to talk about house prices not going up or going down.
Well, they're going down as we speak.
Yeah, they've been going down because the cycle, obviously, but the idea that we can really get enough built that house prices go down, is that something you can live with as a party leader? It used to be sort of a poison sort of statement to suggest that house prices go down in this country.
Look, I remember door knocking in the 2017 campaign, and people in the Epsom electorate were saying, yeah, I've done well, but where are my kids going to live? And I knew that the government was going to change because people were so disappointed with where the housing market was going. Now, 2017, that was a paradise anyway for housing affordability. Labor came in, and rightly or wrongly, the things that they did, such as Kiwi Builds, such as Kāinga Ora, I know they did not affect housing prices. What was astonishing is that they banned foreign investors and then actually shut the border for 2 years, which saw housing prices go even higher, which I think probably finally put a lie to the idea that it was about foreign demand. And then, of course, with rising interest rates, and there's a real economic, I hesitate to say collapse, but it's pretty bad. Yeah. What we now have the opportunity to do is to reset and make it easier to build homes again.
Sure. I mean, one thing that always surprised me about Labour's way they talk about housing, though, is, they failed on the Kiwi Build, but they got the private sector during their term built far more houses than happened under John Key's government. I mean, but they don't really like to take credit for it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, they built, I've always said 1974 was the sort of halcyon year. I think there's about 45,000 houses consented. It was roughly the same in 2022, if I remember right.
I think we beat it. I think it was the biggest.
You might have built it, but of course New Zealand had twice the population by that point.
Of course.
So,
but I mean, it was still, we've only just come back to the consent levels that are nearing what we averaged through the John Key years when you were in government.
Yeah, so definitely there is more private sector building going on. But if you look at, and the New Zealand Initiative have done good work on this, there's a certain number of houses that just wear out every year. Make it 10,000. there's a certain number of houses needed for population increase, and there's also, I would say, a major shortage. That's why people have been living in motels and stuff before that, in cars and garages. So
we certainly had a big population increase.
Yeah, so there still needs to be 50 or 60,000 a year for the next decade, and that's the size of the challenge.
Look, I want to get into some quickfire money talks questions we ask everyone. What's the poorest you've ever been?
Oh, as a student, very, very poor. Basically, literally checking under the seat of your car to see if you got a buck that you can go across to the bakery and buy a baguette. Yeah,
were you a student loan guy? Did you rack up a student loan? Or you said you didn't really have part-time jobs much except in the summer.
Oh, when I was a student, that was by the time I was a university student, that's different. I was a waterproofer, and in the end, I got hired. A whole bunch of my mates ended up working for the same guy who's now quite a strong political supporter of mine, but worked some. I remember one week I did 40 hours and went to all my lectures.
Yeah.
So it was different by the time I was a university student.
Flip side of that question, I suppose, is when you finally got a bit of money in your pocket, what was the most indulgent purchase you've ever made?
Oh, that's a great question. I think probably in most of my 20s and 30s, I just travelled. I mean, I've been to about 16 countries, I think. I've been to 28 American states and most of the Canadian provinces, and I've been all over New Zealand. So I feel really lucky that I've been able to travel pretty freely through my life and see a lot of places.
Sure. On the campaign trail, Christopher Luxon was asked about his spend on groceries, and he said $60 and got a bit of flack. I think he was talking about his own flat in Wellington, not the family. But how's your grocery spend? Are you a big shopper?
I think it's an unfair question because I don't know which city I'm going to be in from day to day.
So that's where Christopher Luxon got caught.
Yeah, not that I would give my colleagues advice in public, but what I would have said is, look, I appreciate that it's a very tough time getting groceries, but in all honesty, the life that you have to lead to do well at this job, you actually can't plan a weekly shop. Because I've tried it, and you end up throwing half of it out because, as it turns out, you didn't realise that you were going on the ACT bus for a week, and by the time you get back, you've just got a whole lot of milk you've got to tip down the sink and bread you've got to put in the bin. So,
Fair enough. Hey, do you buy lotto tickets?
No.
Do you ever imagine winning lotto?
No, I sometimes think about if I'd made better investment decisions when I was younger.
Right, yeah. And the power of all that time.
If I'd realised that houses in 2004 were actually a real bargain, then maybe I'd be at a different place now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, probably, well, not some people, but the kind of career you're in, the question, is money important to you? Is it a driver for you? Or is it just a byproduct of success?
To be really honest, you don't think about it a lot because the job is all-encompassing. It's highly public. Losing in politics is like losing in boxing. It's not actually fun. If you're a lawyer and you don't do very well, then chances are there's still a job somewhere for okay lawyers. If you fail at this, you can't just go and work down the road at a different parliament. Some people end up doing that with a local council, which not something that fills me with joy. So you sort of. Obviously you want to have a plan in the background this is a rapid fire, isn't it? So, to make sure that you're going to be able to pay your bills and eventually pay off your mortgage. But not really. I
mean, would you broadly say you're good with money? When it comes to all that personal finance stuff, without going into all the detail, but
I think you can. I think what I've learned is you can change. So it's a game of two halves. So in my 20s, like I say, I took jobs that didn't pay as well as they might have. Went out and travelled endlessly, and just had a pretty good time. Really partied through most of the 2000s. But after that, I sort of thought, well, sheesh, it's going to be pretty tragic if I carry on like this when I'm in my 60s. So better start setting some foundations to grow older. And so I've been, it's a game of two halves. I really changed tack a couple of years after I was elected.
Sure. Look, this is a weird question to ask you because it's a hypothetical question I ask everyone. If you were Prime Minister for a day.
Well, that's actually next week.
I was going to say, yeah. And there's going to be a few more opportunities over the rest of this term at least. And then you're going to be actually being Prime Minister, and it's harder work. But hypothetically, in an imaginary world where we can make you all-powerful leader of New Zealand for a day, what would be the policy, or what is the big initiative that you would want to focus on to really try and deal with the equity issues and the social inequality in this country?
Changing the way that we regulate the use of land and fund and finance infrastructure. You solve so many problems, everything from health, from bad housing and education, from kids getting moved from one school to the next, to people ageing in place, to people having a sense of belonging and wanting to vote and take an interest in their community. I mean, the number of problems you can solve by making it possible for a person to really do their best at life, but know there's the reward of they're going to have a place of their own. And unfortunately, for too many New Zealanders now, that's not realistic. No matter how hard they work, and when someone tells you no matter how hard you work, it's not going to count, well, man, that's demoralising. And then you either get beaten down or you rise up, and neither of them are actually good. So I would change the way we regulate land use and fund and finance infrastructure, both of which we're doing.
Yeah. So you think they can make a fundamental difference? A lot of the poverty, it starts with a stable home environment.
Look, if you look at the data, and this is a little bit old, but this is about 2017, but they took the Household Labour Force Survey, which started in 1982. In 82, the poorest 20% of households, they were spending 27% of their income on housing, so make it a quarter. By 2017, they were spending 54% of their income on housing, so make it a bit over half. Basically, what's left went from 3/4 of their income after they paid their rental mortgage to less than half of their income after they paid their rental mortgage. Now, that really constrains your options. And the other thing about it is, people say that young people are, a bit hopeless and lazy and not doing what they should, and, you can debate whether that's true. But one thing I know is true is that if you don't have a realistic goal that you can actually achieve, it's very hard to stay motivated. It's very hard to build your self-esteem by saying, right, here's a thing I want to do. I've done it. I can do another thing. So, look, it is essential, and I know I'm going on, but the other thing is you've got to have a concept of what this country's about. I mean, we got probably the best piece of land on the planet in terms of just natural beauty per square kilometre. We've got the mildest climate. I mean, some people go to Sydney for better weather. I don't. It's horrible. Go to Perth in January, you just about die. And then there's this question of, we're a pretty nice place to be. But somehow, despite this huge inheritance, we've managed to make it almost impossible for people to build a place of their own to live here. That's just nuts. So that is the thing I would fix if I was dictator for a day. Prime Minister for a day doesn't work because I got a whole week next week acting Prime Minister, and I don't think we're going to fix it in that time. But I do think the things the government is doing will take us a long way in that direction. That's great, David. Look, I'm going to leave it there. Good luck in the Prime Minister's seat. Thanks for being on Money Talks. Hey, thanks for having me. It's been a great show. Thanks for listening to this episode of Money Talks. If you want to get in touch, drop me a line at liam.dan@nzme.co.nz. And you can read more from me at nzherald.co.nz. Thanks to my producer, Ethan Sills, and sound engineer, Leanne McDonald. Follow Money Talks on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, with new episodes available every Thursday.